Dead weight, the words hung in the air like poison, seeping into the corners of my daughter's pristine kitchen where I wasn't supposed to be. I had shuffled quietly to the bathroom, my slippers barely making a sound on the hardwood floors she was so proud of. That's when I heard her voice, sharp and clinical, speaking to someone on the phone. "I can't keep doing this, Mark. Dad's just dead weight at this point. The Pines has an opening next month. I've already filled out the paperwork." I froze, one hand gripping my walker, the other pressed against the wall for support. My own daughter, my Catherine, the little girl I had once carried on my shoulders through Central Park, now speaking about me as if I were nothing more than a burden to be disposed of. I didn't make a sound. 68 years of living had taught me one valuable lesson. Sometimes it's better to listen than to speak. So I listened as my daughter detailed her plans to her husband, explaining how my declining mobility and increasing neediness were disrupting their lives, how my presence in their guest room for the past 3 months since Margaret's passing was unsustainable. "It's not like he can't afford it," she said with a laugh that cut through me like a blade. "All that money just sitting in accounts while we're the ones dealing with the burden." I turned around, my heart heavier than my arthritic bones, and made my way back to the guest room that had become my temporary prison. I sat on the edge of the bed, a bed that had never felt like mine, and looked at the framed photograph on the nightstand. Margaret's smile beamed back at me, her eyes crinkling at the corners the way they always did when she was truly happy. 43 years of marriage, and now I was dead weight. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Margaret's voice echoing in my mind. "Harold, you've always been too soft with that girl. Sometimes people need to learn the hard way." For the first time since her death, I smiled at the memory of my wife's pragmatism. By morning, a plan had formed in my mind. Catherine had always underestimated me, my intelligence, my resources, my resolve. She saw an old man with a walker, someone who needed help cutting his meat and remembering his medications. What she failed to see was the man who had built a financial empire from nothing, who had navigated the cutthroat world of commercial real estate for 4 decades. At breakfast, I played my part perfectly. I fumbled with my spoon, asked her to repeat herself twice, and thanked her profusely for her sacrifice in hosting me. All the while I was calculating, planning, remembering old contacts and connections that had lain dormant since my retirement. "Dad, we need to talk about your future," Catherine said as she cleared the dishes, not meeting my eyes. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, my voice deliberately frail. "Whatever you think is best." As she outlined her plans for my new life at the Pines retirement community, speaking slowly as if I might not comprehend, I nodded along, the perfect picture of a compliant elderly parent. What Catherine didn't know was that Harold Winters was about to come out of retirement for one last deal, the biggest deal of his life. The next morning, I waited until Catherine left for her Pilates class before making my move. I reached for the burner phone I'd asked my old driver, Miguel, to bring me last week, a request Catherine knew nothing about. My fingers, gnarled with arthritis but still functional, dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Jacobson and Associates, how may I direct your call?" "Robert Jacobson, please. Tell him it's Harold Winters." There was a pause, then, "Mr. Winters, it's been years. I'll connect you right away." Robert's voice boomed through the speaker moments later. "Harold, I thought you'd sailed off into the sunset for good. How's retirement treating you?" "It's been educational," I replied, lowering my voice despite being alone in the house. "I need your help, Robert." Discreetly, I spent the next hour outlining what I needed. Financial records retrieved, accounts accessed, investments liquidated. Robert asked no questions beyond the necessary. That's why I'd always valued him as my attorney. "It'll take a few days to gather everything," he said finally. "Are you sure about this, Harold?" "More sure than I've been about anything since I asked Margaret to marry me." After hanging up, I opened my laptop, the one Catherine thought I only used for watching old movies and video calling my brother in Florida. She had no idea that I checked my investment portfolios daily, that I still read the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times every morning before she woke up. I pulled up the information on the Pines retirement community. It was one of a chain of 12 facilities across the Northeast, owned by a company called Silver Life Care. A quick search revealed they were a subsidiary of a larger healthcare conglomerate, which was publicly traded but struggling. Their stock had dropped 15% in the last quarter alone. I dug deeper, finding reports of understaffing, medication errors, and health code violations at several of their facilities. The Pines, where Catherine planned to deposit me, had the fewest violations, but the pattern was clear. This wasn't about quality care. It was about profit margins. I thought about Margaret again. "Always follow the money," she would say. My wife had been my unofficial business partner for decades, her instincts often sharper than my own. By the time I heard Catherine's key in the lock, I had closed my laptop and was dozing in my armchair, a book open on my lap, the perfect picture of a harmless old man. "Dad? I brought lunch," she called, her voice artificially bright. "Coming, sweetheart," I replied, reaching for my walker with deliberate slowness. Over sandwiches, Catherine broached the subject again. "I've scheduled a tour of the Pines for next Tuesday. You'll love it, Dad. They have a garden and a library and activities every day." I nodded, my expression carefully blank. "That sounds nice. Will you be coming to visit often?" A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. "Of course, Dad, whenever I can. And Mark and the kids will come too." The lie hung between us. I knew from her phone conversation that the Pines was chosen partly for its location, an hour's drive from her home, far enough to make frequent visits impractical. "That would be lovely," I said, patting her hand. "You've always been such a thoughtful daughter." The guilt that flashed across her face gave me no satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, and perhaps a long overdue lesson. Tuesday arrived with unseasonable rain, fat droplets streaking down the windows of Catherine's SUV as we drove to the Pines. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching the suburban landscape give way to more rural surroundings. Catherine filled the silence with cheerful chatter about the facility's amenities, her voice just a touch too bright. "They have a 5-star chef, Dad. Can you believe it? And a movie theater where they show classics every Friday night." I nodded, making appropriate noises of interest, while my mind worked on calculations and contingencies. In the 3 days since my call with Robert, things had moved quickly. My liquid assets were now positioned exactly where I needed them, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. The Pines itself was impressive at first glance, a sprawling complex of buildings set among carefully landscaped grounds. The main entrance featured a fountain and flower beds, though the blooms looked somewhat neglected up close. Catherine didn't notice, already striding toward the glass doors with the confident gait of someone who had made up her mind long ago. Inside, we were greeted by a woman with a practiced smile and a name tag identifying her as Diane Mercer, admissions director. Her handshake was firm, her assessment of me clinical, as she noted my walker and the slight tremor in my left hand. "Mr. Winters, we're so pleased you're considering the Pines for your new home," she said, her voice modulated to the exact tone one might use with a child or a pet. "Let me show you and your daughter around our community." The tour was comprehensive. Dining facilities with white tablecloths and heavy silverware, recreation rooms with card tables and puzzles, a small library with outdated bestsellers, and finally, a model apartment that would be similar to yours, Mr. Winters. I took it all in silently, noting the details that Diane glossed over. The faint smell of disinfectant masking something less pleasant, the residents who sat alone and unengaged in corners, the staff who moved with the hurried efficiency of people stretched too thin. "What's your staff-to-resident ratio?" I asked suddenly, interrupting Diane's monologue about the weekly bingo tournament. She blinked, momentarily thrown. "We maintain industry-standard care levels, Mr. Winters." "Which are?" Catherine touched my arm. "Dad, I'm sure they take excellent care of everyone." "Actually, I'd like to know," I persisted, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "And what about your medication administration protocols? I read about some issues at your Lakewood facility." Diane's smile tightened. "Those reports were greatly exaggerated, Mr. Winters. I assure you, resident safety is our top priority." I said, non-committally. "And who owns the Pines? Silverlife Care, correct? How long have they held the property?" Catherine was staring at me now, confusion evident in her expression. This wasn't the compliant, slightly confused father she'd been dealing with since Margaret's death. Dad, these questions aren't really necessary. On the contrary, I interrupted. If this is to be my home, I think they're very necessary. Diane recovered quickly, steering us toward the dining room where afternoon tea was being served. Silver Life has owned the Pines for about 8 years, Mr. Winters. Now, would you like to see our weekly menu? Our nutritionist designs balanced meals for all dietary needs. I allowed the subject change, having confirmed what I already knew. 8 years, exactly when Silver Life had begun its aggressive expansion, funded largely by cutting corners on patient care while raising fees. As we concluded the tour, Diane handed Catherine a thick folder of paperwork. We'll need these completed, along with the first month's payment and security deposit, to secure Mr. Winters' place. As I mentioned, we have a waiting list, so the sooner the better. Catherine nodded eagerly. I'll have everything back to you by Friday. Wonderful, Diane said, her smile never reaching her eyes. Mr. Winters, we look forward to welcoming you to our community. I smiled back, the expression feeling foreign on my face. I'm looking forward to it more than you know. That evening, after a silent drive home, Catherine busied herself in the kitchen while I retreated to the guest room. I could hear her on the phone again, no doubt updating Mark on the success of the tour. I closed the door quietly and pulled out my burner phone. It's me, I said when Robert answered. I'm moving forward. Have the papers ready by tomorrow. That fast? Are you sure, Harold? I've never been more sure, I replied, thinking of the vacant eyes of the residents I'd seen today, the way they seemed to have surrendered to their circumstances. And Robert? I want this done quietly. No one can know until it's complete. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the bed, my thoughts turning to Margaret again. We'd built our life together from nothing, a small real estate office in a bad part of town that grew into Winters Properties, one of the most successful commercial real estate firms in the Northeast. When we sold the company upon my retirement, the windfall had been substantial. Catherine had always known we were comfortable, but she had no idea of the true extent of our wealth. Margaret and I had agreed long ago that our children should make their own way in the world. We paid for their education and helped with down payments on their first homes, but otherwise, they lived on what they earned. Now, that decision seemed prescient. Catherine saw me as a burden with some modest savings, not as a man with the resources to fundamentally alter her plans. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Dad, dinner's ready, Catherine called. I found her in the dining room, the table set with the good china. A peace offering, perhaps, or an attempt to soften what was coming next. I thought we could celebrate, she said, pouring wine into 2 glasses. The Pines is perfect for you, Dad. You'll have company, activities, proper care. I took a small sip of wine. It seemed nice enough. Catherine's smile faltered slightly at my lukewarm response. More than nice. It's one of the best facilities in the state, and the monthly fee is actually reasonable, considering all they offer. And how will that be paid for? I asked mildly. Well, she hesitated. Your Social Security and pension should cover most of it. And you have your savings from the business. I've worked out all the numbers. I nodded slowly. I see. And this is what you want from me? Catherine reached across the table to pat my hand. It's what's best, Dad. Mark and I both think so. You need more care than we can provide. And the Pines has professionals who know exactly what to do. Because I'm dead weight here, I said quietly. The color drained from her face. What did you say? Dead weight. That's what you called me on the phone with Mark last week, when you thought I couldn't hear you. Catherine's mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. Then, Dad, I never... You must have misheard. I heard perfectly well, I interrupted, my voice steady. Just as I've seen perfectly well how eager you are to be rid of me since your mother died. Tears welled in her eyes. Genuine or calculated, I couldn't tell anymore. That's not fair. We've had you here for months. We've done everything we can, everything except ask me what I want, I replied. But it doesn't matter now. I've made my decision. Relief flooded her features. So you'll go to the Pines. You'll be happy there, I promise. I set down my fork and looked my daughter in the eye. No, Catherine. I've made a different decision entirely. But you'll find out about that soon enough. The next morning, I told Catherine I needed to visit the bank to sort out some paperwork for the Pines. She offered to drive me, but I insisted on taking a taxi, claiming I had other errands and didn't want to inconvenience her. The relief on her face was palpable, a few hours of freedom from her burdensome father. The taxi dropped me not at the local bank branch, but at the towering glass headquarters of First National in downtown Boston. Robert was waiting for me in the lobby, his tall frame easy to spot despite the bustling crowd of financial professionals. "You're looking well, Harold," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Retirement suits you." I snorted. "Widowhood and being treated like a child don't suit anyone, Robert. Let's get this done." We took the elevator to the executive floor, where a conference room had been prepared. Inside waited 3 people: James Chen, my investment manager of 20 years, Sophia Patel, a corporate attorney specializing in acquisitions, and Michael Donahue, a silver-haired man I'd never met, but whose reputation in the healthcare investment sector preceded him. "Mr. Winters," Michael said, rising to shake my hand. "I must say, when Robert called me about this opportunity, I was intrigued. It's not often we see this kind of targeted acquisition strategy." "I'm not interested in the entire healthcare sector," I replied, lowering myself carefully into the padded chair at the head of the table. "Just one small corner of it." For the next 3 hours, we reviewed the plan I'd conceived in the darkness of Catherine's guest room. Silver Life Care, the parent company of the Pines, was vulnerable. Their stock was undervalued due to recent scandals and management issues. With the right approach, a controlling interest could be acquired without alerting the current leadership to what was happening. "We've already secured 12% through various shell companies," James explained, sliding a folder toward me. "Another 15% is available through these institutional investors who are looking to offload. The tricky part will be the final 24% to give you majority control." Sophia interjected, "The current CEO, Victor Harmon, holds 18% personally. He won't sell easily." I smiled for the first time that day. "He doesn't need to sell easily. He just needs to sell." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You have something on Harmon?" "Let's just say I've done my research. Victor and I have mutual acquaintances from the old days. His management practices aren't the only questionable things in his history." The meeting continued, strategies refined, contingencies planned. By the time we broke for lunch, the initial transfers were already in motion. My life savings, the fortune Margaret and I had built over decades of hard work, was being deployed in a way neither of us could have imagined. "This is going to cost you most of your liquid assets," Robert warned as we shared a private moment. "Are you sure you want to spend your remaining years running a healthcare company?" I shook my head. "I don't intend to run it for long. Just long enough." "And Catherine, what will you tell her?" The question hung in the air between us. What would I tell my daughter, who saw me as nothing but a burden to be warehoused until death? "The truth," I said finally, "but not yet. First, let's make sure this works." As I left the building, leaning more heavily on my walker than usual after the long meeting, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Margaret's diagnosis 2 years ago. Purpose. The weight of grief and betrayal that had settled on my shoulders began to lift, replaced by the familiar energy of a complex deal coming together. Catherine was waiting when the taxi dropped me at her house, her expression a mixture of concern and irritation. "Dad, you've been gone for hours. I was worried sick." "Sorry, sweetheart," I said, shuffling past her into the house. The bank was busy, and then I met an old friend for coffee. Lost track of time. She helped me to my armchair, fussing with pillows and asking if I needed water or medication. I accepted her attention with the same placid smile I'd perfected over recent months, all the while thinking of the documents now being filed, the calls being made, the pieces moving into place. "Did you get everything sorted for the Pines?" she asked finally. "Oh yes," I replied, meeting her eyes steadily. "Everything's being taken care of." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of clandestine phone calls and secret meetings disguised as doctor's appointments and physical therapy sessions. Catherine, focused on preparing for my imminent move to the Pines, noticed nothing unusual in my behavior. If anything, I became more cooperative, more agreeable to her plans, a strategy that only reinforced her belief in the rightness of her decision. "I've packed most of your clothes," she announced one evening, entering the guest room without knocking. "You won't need much. The Pines provides laundry service twice weekly." I looked up from the book I was pretending to read. "Thank you, dear. You're so thoughtful." Her smile faltered slightly at my calm acceptance. Perhaps she'd expected resistance, tears, a scene that would justify her actions. Instead, She got compliance that offered no absolution. They called today, she continued, sitting on the edge of the bed. Your room will be ready next Monday. Isn't that wonderful? Sooner than we expected. Wonderful, I echoed, turning a page. I'm looking forward to it. Catherine lingered, seemingly wanting to say more, but eventually left with a small sigh. As soon as the door closed, I reached for my burner phone. Robert, they've moved up the timeline. We need to accelerate everything. His voice was tense. We're at 39% ownership. Harmon knows something's happening. He's called an emergency board meeting for Friday. Perfect, I said. That's when we'll make our move. Have Michael ready with the additional capital, and make sure Sophia has those documents we discussed. The next few days were a high-wire act of deception. While Catherine busied herself with final preparations for my institutionalization, I was orchestrating the hostile takeover of the very company that owned the Pines. The irony was not lost on me. Friday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. I told Catherine I needed to visit my doctor one last time before the move. I'll come with you, she offered, keys already in hand. No need, I insisted. Miguel is picking me up. Dr. Shapiro wants to review my medications privately, and then we're having lunch. Old friends saying goodbye. She hesitated, then nodded. All right, but be back by 4. We have that final meeting with Diane at the Pines to sign all the paperwork. I wouldn't miss it, I assured her. Miguel, loyal as ever, was waiting outside in his immaculately maintained town car. He'd been my driver for 20 years before my retirement, and had come immediately when I called him back to service 2 weeks ago. The usual discretion, Miguel, I said as I settled into the back seat. Of course, Mr. Winters. Your secrets die with me. His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, warm with understanding. Miguel had known Margaret well. He'd seen the kind of partnership we'd shared. Perhaps he understood better than most what her loss had meant to me. The Silver Life Care headquarters was a modest building in a corporate park outside the city. Nothing like the gleaming towers of the financial district, but impressive enough to project success to investors and families considering their services. Robert met me in the parking lot, his expression grim. Harmon's inside with the board. He's trying to implement a poison pill to prevent the takeover. Too late, I said, straightening my tie. We hit 51% ownership an hour ago. Sophia confirmed it. Robert's eyes widened. How? The institutional investors weren't supposed to sell until next week. I allowed myself a small smile. Let's just say Victor Harmon isn't the only one with skeletons in his closet. Amazing how quickly people will sell when certain information comes to light. The boardroom fell silent when I entered, leaning on my walker, Robert and Sophia flanking me like bodyguards. Victor Harmon, a florid-faced man in his 50s, stood at the head of the table, mid-sentence in what appeared to be an impassioned speech. What is the meaning of this interruption? He demanded. This is a private board meeting. Sophia stepped forward, placing a folder on the table. Not anymore. As of 11:17 this morning, Harold Winters is the majority shareholder of Silver Life Care. This meeting is now under his direction. The chaos that followed was both predictable and satisfying. Harmon shouted about illegal tactics and threatened lawsuits. Board members whispered urgently to each other. Someone called for security. I simply stood there, leaning on my walker, waiting for the storm to pass. When it finally quieted, I spoke for the first time. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the dramatic entrance. It wasn't my preferred approach, but Mr. Harmon's resistance left me no choice. I moved slowly to the chair Harmon had vacated, lowering myself carefully. I am now the controlling interest in this company, and I have some concerns about how it's being run. This is outrageous, Harmon sputtered. You can't just walk in here and... I can and I have, I interrupted, my voice stronger than it had been in months. And my first act as majority shareholder is to call for your resignation, effective immediately. The room erupted again, but this time Sophia took control, outlining the legal reality of the situation. One by one, the board members' protests subsided as they realized the futility of resistance. By 3 o'clock, it was done. Victor Harmon had been escorted from the building, interim leadership had been established, and I had signed the necessary documents to formalize my control of Silver Life Care, and by extension, the Pines retirement community. As Miguel drove me back to Catherine's house, I felt exhaustion settling into my bones. The adrenaline that had carried me through the day was fading, leaving behind the aches and pains of my 72 years. "Was it worth it, Mr. Winters?" Miguel asked quietly. I thought about Margaret, about the life we'd built, about the daughter who had dismissed me as dead weight. "Ask me again on Monday," I replied, watching the suburban landscape slide past the window. After I've moved into the Pines, Catherine was waiting anxiously when Miguel dropped me off, her expression a mixture of relief and irritation. "Dad, where have you been? We need to leave for the Pines in 20 minutes. I allowed her to help me inside, moving more slowly than usual after the day's exertions. "Sorry, dear. Dr. Shapiro had a lot to discuss about my care plan." She bustled around, gathering her purse and the folder of paperwork for the Pines. "Well, we can't be late. Diane is making a special exception to meet with us after hours." I hid a smile at that. Diane Mercer, like everyone else at the Pines, would soon learn exactly who was making the exceptions. The drive to the facility was filled with Catherine's nervous chatter. She'd clearly rehearsed a speech about how this was for the best, how I'd thank her once I settled in, how she'd visit often. I let her talk, watching the familiar route with new eyes, the eyes of an owner rather than a prospective resident. Diane greeted us in the lobby, her professional smile firmly in place. "Mr. Winters, Ms. Winters, right on time. Shall we go to my office to complete the paperwork?" I nodded, following her down the corridor I'd toured just weeks before. Nothing had changed physically, but everything felt different now. I noted the worn carpet in one section, the flickering fluorescent light in another, all things that would need attention under new management. In Diane's office, Catherine immediately reached for the pen, ready to sign the admission documents on my behalf, a power of attorney I'd granted her years ago, never imagining how she'd use it. "Before we start," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in Catherine's presence for months, "I'd like to clarify a few things." Diane smiled indulgently. "Of course, Mr. Winters. What questions do you have?" "Not questions, statements." I straightened in my chair, setting aside the frail demeanor I'd adopted. "As of today, I am the majority owner of Silver Life Care, the parent company of the Pines." The silence that followed was absolute. Catherine froze, pen hovering above the paper. Diane's smile vanished, replaced by confusion. "I don't understand," she said finally. "It's quite simple," I continued. "Through a series of strategic acquisitions, I now control 51% of Silver Life Care's stock. Victor Harmon has been removed as CEO, and an interim leadership team is already in place." Catherine found her voice at last. "Dad, what are you talking about? This isn't funny." I turned to my daughter, meeting her gaze directly. "It's not meant to be funny, Catherine. It's meant to be instructive." From my jacket pocket, I withdrew a folded document that Robert had prepared. I slid it across the desk to Diane, whose hands trembled slightly as she opened it. "This confirms what I've said," I explained. "You can call corporate headquarters to verify, though I imagine they're rather busy at the moment." Diane's eyes widened as she scanned the document. "This appears to be legitimate, but I don't understand why I would buy the nursing home my daughter intended to abandon me in." I finished for her. "That's a conversation for another time. For now, I'd like to inform you of some immediate changes to the Pines operations." For the next 15 minutes, I outlined the reforms that would begin immediately. Increased staffing levels, better training, enhanced meal options, more engaging activities, and most importantly, a new resident dignity protocol that would transform how the elderly were treated in the facility. Diane listened with increasing alarm, no doubt wondering if her job was secure. Catherine sat frozen, her face a mask of disbelief. "Now," I said finally, "about my accommodations. I will indeed be moving in on Monday, but not as a regular resident. I'll be taking the currently vacant director's apartment on the top floor, from which I'll oversee the transformation of not just the Pines, but all 12 Silver Life facilities." I turned to Catherine, whose face had drained of all color. "You were right about one thing, daughter. I do need a new purpose now that your mother is gone. Thank you for helping me find it." The drive home was silent. Catherine gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, while I gazed out the window, mentally reviewing the day's events and planning tomorrow's actions. It wasn't until we were back in her house, the door firmly closed behind us, that she finally spoke. "How could you do this?" she whispered. her voice raw with emotion. "How could you humiliate me like that?" I looked at my daughter, truly looked at her, and saw not the caring, compassionate child Margaret and I had raised, but a stranger shaped by greed and convenience. "How could you call your father dead weight?" I countered quietly. "How could you plan to warehouse me in a facility without once asking what I wanted?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You don't understand. It's been so hard since Mom died. You need more care than I can give." "Then you should have said that," I replied. "We could have discussed options together, as family. Instead, you made decisions about my life behind my back, treating me like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected." Catherine sank onto the sofa, her defenses crumbling. "What happens now?" I lowered myself into the armchair across from her, suddenly feeling every one of my 72 years. "Now, I moved to the Pines as planned. I use my experience and resources to make it a place where people are treated with dignity. And you, Catherine, have some serious reflection to do about the kind of daughter, the kind of person you want to be." Monday morning dawned clear and bright. A perfect September day for new beginnings. I stood in Catherine's guest room, surveying the space that had been my temporary home since Margaret's death. The room looked barren now, my few possessions packed into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. Catherine appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. We had barely spoken since the confrontation at the Pines, existing in a state of cold politeness that was more painful than outright hostility. "The car is here," she said flatly. I nodded, reaching for my walker. "I can manage the suitcases if you'll take the box." She moved to help without comment, and together we made our way to the waiting town car. Miguel stood by the open trunk, his face carefully neutral. He'd witnessed enough family drama over his years of service to know when discretion was paramount. "Good morning, Mr. Winters," he said, taking the suitcases from me. "Beautiful day for a new adventure." "Indeed it is, Miguel. Indeed it is." The drive to the Pines was silent, Catherine staring resolutely out the window while I reviewed emails on my tablet. Correspondence from the interim management team, updates on the corporate restructuring, and a particularly satisfying message confirming Victor Harmon's formal resignation. As we approached the facility, I noticed small changes already taking place. The neglected flower beds had been freshly mulched, and a crew was repairing the cracked walkway leading to the entrance. Inside, the difference was even more pronounced. Staff moved with purpose rather than harried efficiency, and residents were engaged in conversation with aides who actually seemed to be listening. Diane Mercer greeted us in the lobby, her manner considerably more deferential than during our previous visits. "Mr. Winters, welcome to the Pines. Everything is prepared as you requested." "Thank you, Diane. And please call me Harold. We'll be working closely together." She led us to the elevator, explaining the changes already implemented and those planned for the coming weeks. Catherine trailed behind, silent and watchful, perhaps seeing the facility through new eyes, not as a convenient solution to her problem, but as a community of human beings deserving of respect and care. The director's apartment on the top floor was spacious and well-appointed, with large windows overlooking the wooded grounds that gave the Pines its name. It had been hastily prepared for my arrival, the previous occupants' personal items removed, but their institutional blandness remaining. "We can have it redecorated to your specifications," Diane offered, noting my assessment of the space. "That won't be necessary yet," I replied. "Function before form. I'd rather focus our resources on improving resident care first." Catherine stood awkwardly by the door as Miguel and Diane brought in my belongings. When they had gone, promising to return in an hour to escort me to a welcome reception, an uncomfortable silence fell between us. "So this was your plan all along," Catherine said finally, her voice flat. "To humiliate me and take over a nursing home company." I moved to the window, looking out at the pine trees swaying gently in the breeze. "No, Catherine. My plan was to live out my remaining years with dignity, hopefully surrounded by family who valued me. This was an adaptation." "I don't know what you expect from me now," she said, crossing her arms defensively. I turned to face her. "I expect nothing. What you do next is entirely your choice. You can continue to see me as a burden, a problem that didn't go away as neatly as you'd planned. Or you can see this as an opportunity to rebuild what we've lost." "And what exactly have we lost, Dad?" Her voice cracked slightly. "You've barely spoken to me since Mom died. You just retreated. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I had withdrawn after Margaret's death, wrapped in grief so profound it left little room for connection. But that didn't excuse what followed. Perhaps we both failed each other, I conceded. But treating me like an inconvenience to be disposed of was your choice, Catherine. And buying this place was mine. She looked away, blinking rapidly. I should go. Mark is expecting me home for dinner. Of course, I made no move to stop her. The door is always open should you choose to walk through it. Catherine hesitated at the threshold, as if there was more she wanted to say, but then she was gone. The soft click of the door, the only evidence she had been there at all. I stood alone in my new home, feeling the weight of the day's emotions. There was satisfaction in what I'd accomplished, yes, but also a profound sadness for what had been revealed about my relationship with my daughter. Margaret would have been heartbroken to see the distance between us. "What now, old girl?" I murmured to the empty room, imagining Margaret's practical voice answering me. "Now you get to work." And that's exactly what I did. The first month at the Pines passed in a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into the work of transformation with the same energy and focus that had built Winter's Properties decades earlier. My days were filled with staff meetings, consultations with healthcare experts, and conversations with residents whose insights proved invaluable. The changes began small but meaningful. Fresh flowers in the common areas, a revised menu featuring dishes the residents actually wanted to eat, a schedule of activities that treated them as adults with varied interests rather than children to be occupied. "Mr. Winters, the book club is requesting more contemporary fiction," reported Elaine, the newly hired activities director who had replaced the previous coordinator, a well-meaning but patronizing woman who specialized in simplistic crafts and bingo. "Order whatever they want," I replied, "and see if any local authors would be interested in coming to discuss their work. Many of our residents have remarkable life experiences. They deserve intellectual stimulation, not just entertainment." Elaine nodded enthusiastically. "I've already reached out to the university. Several professors are interested in giving guest lectures." This was typical of the cultural shift taking place. Staff who embraced the new philosophy of respect and dignity thrived. Those who couldn't adjust found themselves gently but firmly guided toward other employment opportunities. The physical environment began to change as well. The institutional beige walls were repainted in warm, vibrant colors chosen by resident committees. The stiff, uncomfortable furniture in the common areas was replaced with pieces that were both attractive and accessible for those with mobility issues. Gardens were expanded and enhanced, with raised beds allowing residents to pursue horticulture without having to kneel or bend. Most importantly, staffing levels increased dramatically. No more were nurses and aides rushing from task to task, treating residents like items on a checklist. Now they had time to sit and talk, to notice changes in condition before they became emergencies, to provide the kind of personalized care that preserved dignity. The financial impact was significant, of course. Profit margins shrank as expenses rose. But as Robert had predicted when I reviewed the quarterly numbers with him, occupancy rates were climbing as word spread about the changes at the Pines. "You've got a waiting list now," he noted during one of our regular meetings. "That's unheard of in this industry. People want to be treated like people, not inventory," I replied. "It's not complicated." "And the other facilities? The board is concerned about the rollout timeline." I smiled. "Tell them to be patient. We're using the Pines as our model. Once we've perfected the approach here, we'll implement it across all 12 locations." What I didn't tell Robert was that I had another motivation for the measured pace. Each week that passed without contact from Catherine was another week I hoped she might reflect on her actions and reach out. The door remained open, but she had yet to walk through it. My other children were a different story. My son Thomas, who lived in California with his family, called frequently after learning about my retirement project, as he called it. My youngest daughter, Elizabeth, visited twice, bringing her children who delighted the residents with their energy and curiosity. "Dad, this place is amazing," Elizabeth said during her second visit, as we walked the grounds together. "What you've done here in just a few weeks. It's incredible. It's what should have been done all along," I replied. "These people deserve better than what they were getting." She squeezed my arm. "Have you heard from Catherine?" I shook my head. "Not a word. She's always been stubborn," Elizabeth sighed. takes after you that way. I chuckled despite myself. Your mother would certainly agree with that assessment. As we rounded a corner of the path, we came upon a small gathering of residents seated in a semicircle under a large oak tree. A woman in her 80s was reading poetry aloud, her voice strong and clear in the afternoon air. That's Dorothea, I explained quietly to Elizabeth. She was an English professor at Wellesley for 40 years. Now she leads our poetry circle twice a week. We stood listening as Dorothea finished reading Tennyson's Ulysses. Her expression animated as she discussed the poem's themes of aging and purpose with the group. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. The words resonated deeply, and I found myself blinking back unexpected tears. Elizabeth noticed, squeezing my hand silently. Later that evening, after Elizabeth had gone, I sat in my apartment reviewing the day's events. My tablet chimed with an incoming email, the weekly report from the financial team at Silver Life's headquarters. I opened it, expecting the usual updates on budget allocations and occupancy rates. Instead, I found myself looking at a formal offer to purchase Silver Life Care from a large national healthcare conglomerate. The figure was substantial, nearly double what I had paid to acquire my controlling interest just weeks earlier. I set the tablet down, moving to the window to gaze out at the now familiar view of pine trees silhouetted against the night sky. The offer was tempting from a purely financial perspective. I could sell, recoup my investment with a significant profit, and walk away. But as I watched the lights in the residents' windows, people who were beginning to trust that the Pines was truly becoming a home rather than an institution, I knew what my answer would be. Some things were worth more than money. Margaret had taught me that, though it had taken me most of my life to fully understand it. I picked up my phone and dialed Robert's number. "I've seen the offer," I said when he answered. "Draft a polite but firm rejection. Silver Life Care is not for sale." "Are you sure, Harold? That's a lot of money to walk away from." "I'm sure," I replied, "but I do want to make some changes to the corporate structure. Set up a meeting with the legal team for next week. I have some ideas about the future of this company." As I hung up, I felt a sense of purpose stronger than any I'd experienced in my business career. This wasn't just about proving something to Catherine anymore. It was about creating a legacy that mattered, one that Margaret would have been proud of. 6 months passed, and the Pines became almost unrecognizable from the place Catherine had selected for my warehousing. The transformation had exceeded even my ambitious vision, creating a community that balanced excellent care with respect for independence and individuality. Word spread beyond our immediate area. Healthcare journals published articles about the Winters model of elder care. Universities requested permission to send gerontology students for observational rotations. Even state regulators took notice, using our protocols as examples of best practices. The other Silver Life facilities were in various stages of similar transformation, each adapting the core principles to their unique communities. The corporate structure had been reorganized as well, with a newly created foundation holding a significant ownership stake, ensuring that profit motives would never again override quality of care. Through it all, Catherine remained absent. Thomas and Elizabeth visited when they could, bringing news of their sister that they thought I might want to hear. Her marriage to Mark was strained. She had taken a leave of absence from her job. She was seeing a therapist. I received these updates with a mixture of sadness and hope, never pressing for more information, never sending messages through my other children. The door remained open, but Catherine would need to choose to walk through it herself. On a crisp October morning, almost exactly a year after Margaret's death, I was conducting my daily walk through the grounds when Miguel approached, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Winters, you have a visitor in the main lobby." Something in his tone made me pause. "Who is it, Miguel?" "Ms. Catherine, sir." I felt my heart rate quicken. "Thank you. I'll be right there." I took a moment to collect myself before heading inside, uncertain what to expect. When I entered the lobby, I saw her immediately, standing by the reception desk, looking smaller somehow than I remembered, her posture tense. "Catherine," I said simply. She turned, and I was struck by how much she looked like Margaret in that moment. The same determined set to her jaw, the same vulnerability in her eyes. "Dad," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "The door has always been open," I said, gesturing toward the garden. Would you like to walk with me? It's a beautiful day. She nodded, following me outside to the path that wound through the carefully tended grounds. We walked in silence for several minutes. The only sounds are footsteps on the gravel and the distant laughter of residents enjoying a Tai Chi class on the lawn. This place is different, she said finally. It's not what I remember. It's what it should have been all along, I replied. What all such places should be. Another silence stretched between us until Catherine stopped abruptly, turning to face me. I'm sorry, she said, the words tumbling out as if she'd been holding them back for months. I'm so sorry, Dad. What I said, what I did, it was unforgivable. I studied my daughter's face, seeing the genuine remorse there, the pain she'd been carrying. Why did you come today, Catherine? I asked gently. She looked away, blinking rapidly. I've been in therapy since everything happened, trying to understand why I treated you that way, why I was so eager to put you somewhere, anywhere, as long as it wasn't my problem anymore. And what did you discover? That I was terrified, she whispered. After Mom died, seeing you struggle, it forced me to confront my own mortality, my own fears about aging and dependency. It was easier to make you the problem than to face those fears. I nodded slowly. Fear makes us do terrible things sometimes. That's no excuse, she insisted. You deserved better from me. Mom would have been so ashamed. Your mother wasn't a saint, Catherine. She was human, just like the rest of us. She would have understood fear. Catherine wiped away a tear. Elizabeth told me what you've done here. How you've changed everything. She said I should see it for myself. And now that you have, I'm proud of you, Dad, she said, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. And I'm ashamed of myself. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I understand now. What I did was wrong. I felt something shift inside me. A weight I hadn't fully acknowledged beginning to lift. Would you like to see the rest of the place? I asked. There's quite a bit more to show you. Relief flooded her features. I'd like that very much. As we continued our walk, I pointed out the changes. The community garden where residents grew vegetables for the kitchen, the art studio where a former commercial artist taught painting classes, the technology center where teenagers from the local high school helped residents navigate tablets and smartphones. The Residents' Council meets every Monday, I explained as we passed the newly renovated conference room. They have actual authority here now. Voting rights on everything from menu planning to activity schedules. It's how it should be, Catherine said quietly. They're adults, not children. Exactly. We ended our tour at my apartment, where I invited her in for tea. As I prepared the cups, Catherine wandered to the bookshelf, where I kept family photographs. She picked up one of Margaret holding newborn Elizabeth, with young Catherine and Thomas peering curiously at their baby sister. I miss her so much, Catherine said, her voice breaking. I think that was part of it too. Every time I looked at you, I saw her absence. I set the teacups down, moving to stand beside my daughter. I see her in you, I said gently. In your determination, your intelligence, even in your stubbornness. A small laugh escaped her. Elizabeth says I get that from you. Your mother would agree with that assessment. We sat with our tea, the conversation gradually becoming easier, less weighted with unspoken recriminations. Catherine told me about her marriage troubles, her career uncertainties, her ongoing therapy. I shared stories about the Pines, about the residents who had become friends, about my plans for the foundation. As afternoon faded into evening, Catherine glanced at her watch reluctantly. I should go. It's a long drive back. I nodded, walking her to the door. Thank you for coming today. She hesitated, then asked the question I could see had been on her mind throughout our visit. Can I come back? Maybe next weekend? The door's always open, Catherine, I replied, meaning it more than ever. Always. After she left, I returned to the window, watching as she walked to her car in the parking lot. She paused before getting in, looking back at the building, not with the relief of someone escaping an obligation, but with the thoughtfulness of someone considering a return. I thought of Margaret then, of what she might say about this day. It's a start, Harold. I could almost hear her practical voice. Just a start, and it was. Not an ending tied up neatly with a bow, but a beginning. Messy and uncertain and hopeful, like all true reconciliations. As I turned from the window, My gaze fell on the framed photograph of Margaret that had accompanied me from Catherine's guest room to my new home. Her eyes seemed to crinkle with that familiar smile, the one that always appeared when she was truly happy. "You were right, old girl," I said to the empty room. "Sometimes people do need to learn the hard way." Outside my window, the pines swayed gently in the evening breeze, their enduring presence a reminder that some things, once deeply rooted, can withstand even the harshest seasons.